Okay, there we go. So this is the Oregon Poison Center Journal Club for January 18th, 2007, and we are talking about methemoglobinemia. And we're going to start out talking about a famous essay written by Berton Roueché, the medical journalist for the New York Magazine back in the 50s and 60s, and a famous essay he wrote, 11 Blue Men. So Laura?
So 11 Blue Men is a story within a book called The Medical Detective, written by Berton Roueché, who wrote for the New Yorker magazine, and he covered stories of investigative epidemiology, making public health fascinating and fun. And this story concerns our topic of Journal Club, methemoglobinemia, and brings it to light in a way that is very fascinating and unfolds like a detective story, as so much of epidemiology is. So this is occurring in 1944, in which a unusual epidemic of elderly blue men struck some emergency rooms in New York City. These men, first one man came in, and he was described as having blue nose, lips, ears, and fingers, all sky blue. He was unconscious, and the blueness had spread over a large part of his body. And the initial thought was that it was just carbon monoxide poisoning, although to find somebody lying alone on the sidewalk, as he was, to be overcome by something that usually you would expect to be an asphyxiant in an enclosed space is a little weird. They surmised in the emergency department that if there was one, there's bound to be more. And they were rewarded by several other blue men. They were all notably elderly and disheveled. They got 9, and 5 of them were from the same single-room occupancy hotel. Others had been found in condemned buildings or in front of the Eclipse cafeteria down by City Hall. And they all came in early in the morning. And by the time the last blue man had arrived, the Department of Health was notified. And the 2 epidemiologists, the chief epidemiologist and his assistant, were both interviewed, and the events of the investigation unfolded through their telling. It turned out that what these derelicts, as they are referred to in the article, although we know that that's not politically correct these days, were victims of was a type of poisoning that they note was so rare that there are only 10 previous outbreaks recorded in the medical literature. And remember, this is 1944. And the previous epidemics, the largest number of people in a single outbreak was 4, and that was in Algeria in 1926. So before we get to the cause, we'll go to their investigation. So Dr. Greenberg, the head epidemiologist, stated that they sort of worked their way back to all of these men having been eating at the Eclipse cafeteria. So he sent his man, Dr. Pelletieri, out there, and after interviewing, Dr. Pelletieri went to the emergency department that had 9 of the men, and they'd all gotten sick right after eating, the ones that were able to be interviewed stated. So they thought maybe what they ate was really the culprit, and it was probably food poisoning and not a gas. So they investigated it some more, and Dr. Pelletieri actually went down to the cafeteria. He also got a blood sample from each of the men, and they sent the blood samples to a city toxicologist for overnight analysis. And they hit upon the diagnosis of methemoglobinemia. And once they come to that, purely from the blue coloring, they had to figure out how you would get methemoglobinemia from an epidemic of food poisoning. And the other thing that they thought about was the suddenness of the onset of illness in these men, how quickly they fell after they ate. One of them didn't even make it very far past the front door of the cafeteria. And that really ruled out food poisoning for them. Excuse me. So then they were thinking, well, maybe this was a drug. So Dr. Pelletieri, they state in the article, having attended to his bloodletting, reached the Eclipse cafeteria at around 5 o'clock. He called the place strictly a horse market and dirtier than most, but the meals were cheap, 15 cents. And they went around looking at it, and the place was disgusting. And they had some findings. There were about 15 code violations: roaches, fly infestation, dirt, grease, refuse under the kitchen sink, and there was a sewer pipe leaking, etc. So this wasn't the most savory place to be eating, but they had to look around and find out what were the men eating and where were the exact ingredients. So they took all the stuff that had been used to make the oatmeal in the morning, since this was the common denominator for all of the men. And the cook said, well, here's the oatmeal. I use this, I use water, and I use salt. And there was an open gallon of salt standing on the stove, and he had pulled it down, and he says, I refill this every morning from a supply can. And he said there were actually 2 on the shelf that morning. One was full of salt, and the other one was full of sodium nitrate that they use in corning beef and making pastrami. So so Dr. Pelletier didn't think that there was anything wrong with this sodium nitrate. He took it along with the other sample from the other bucket that was supposedly salt, and they took it to a health department chemist who was going to have a report ready the following afternoon. And they do mark in the article that Dr. Pelletier went to have lunch or an early dinner in a restaurant that he had a lot more confidence in than the Eclipse cafeteria. So he dropped by the Eclipse the next day, which was shut down, and he spoke to the cook again. And apparently, they remark in the article, or Berton Roueché remarks, the cook had apparently passed an uneasy night with his conscience, remarking that it was possible that he had absent-mindedly refilled the salt can on the stove with the one containing the sodium nitrate. Well, Dr. Pelletier had already thought about that, and he told him not to worry. He didn't think that that was too important, and they were certain that nobody really wanted these men poisoned, that this was obviously some type of mistake. They did find at the same time that the chief toxicologist reported that the men all had high levels of methemoglobin. So they were still looking for reasons for this, and the other thing that they found from the health inspection officer who was looking at the food was that the salt can and the one that was supposed to be full of sodium nitrate actually contained sodium nitrite. Not an insignificant difference, because once they learned that there was nitrate involved, the important point is that there was a big difference between nitrate and nitrite. They both look and taste more or less like table salt, but sodium nitrite is a much more powerful poison. And they remark again that there had only been 10 outbreaks like this on record, and that sodium nitrite poisoning is so unusual that some of the standard toxicology texts don't mention it. So they said, actually nitrite is pretty common. It's used in treating heart conditions and high blood pressure, and that's something we still use it for. But it also has another use that makes the presence of it at this Eclipse cafeteria more plausible. And that is that it was used as, during the war and in recent years at that time, it had been used as a substitute for sodium nitrate in preserving meat. And the government will permit it, but stipulates that the finished meat cannot contain more than 1 part of sodium nitrate per 5,000 parts of meat. And cooking will safely destroy that small quantity. Well, they had the cook pick up the handful of salt that he had thrown into the oatmeal, and they took this amount and weighed it. And it weighed about 100 grams. So they realized that the proportion of nitrite in the cereal was considerably higher than 1 in 5,000. It was probably about 1 to 80 before cooking did destroy some of it. So they felt that they had cracked the code, but there was still one more fascinating detail. And this detail is really interesting because they wanted to know, well, now how come 125 people ate oatmeal and only 11 got sick? So it's not enough that they just ate too much sodium nitrite. Everybody had the same cereal. So they remade the cereal again, exactly as the cook had made it. And then they analyzed it and found it to contain 2.5 grains of sodium nitrite. So that dose didn't match the toxic dose, which would be 3 grains. So that estimated 114 other people that ate the oatmeal were not expected to have gotten sick. But what pushed those 11 over the edge? So then they came to realize that people who drink alcohol are often salt depleted. They have a subnormal concentration of sodium chloride, and they may not get enough through their diet, or they may lose it more rapidly. For whatever reason, they're more prone to add salt to their foods. So when they checked the salt shakers, they found them to contain sodium nitrate mixed in. And there was more than enough, such that a spoonful of that salt contained more than half a grain. And although they said that they could never really check the table salt angle, because the men had all been discharged to various parts unknown at that point, They did say that the chief epidemiologist did say that tied the case up for him morally, and he knew that this was the right answer, despite not being able to verify it with the men. And the article ends with the quote, "Any animal you know, whether a mouse or a man, tends to try to obtain a necessary substance that his body lacks." The final question had been answered.
Great summary of a great essay on the puzzle of the 11 blue men, and the fact that it wasn't just the oatmeal, but it was the extra table salt that pushed them over the top.
The observation that the alcoholics would want more salt in their diet. That's
right.
Just fascinating. And the other stories in the medical detective are equally good. Still recording.
So we'll go on to the next article here, and it talks about again, methemoglobinemia in 2 children. It was written by Margaret Dolan and Naomi Lubin in Peds Emergency Care in 1987. And they basically had 2 cases here that came in on the same day to the ER they were working at. And it looks like Children's National Medical Center in Washington, D.C. And they both had the same problem, but from different causes. And so they wanted to help point out the difference between those 2 events. And the first case is a 4-week-old child who was well until the day he showed up, and then he noted he was blue, similar to our 11 blue men. And it was otherwise no problems, no cough, nothing exposed to, no mothballs, which was a known problem at the time. He had some clear fluids, he had some normal feedings, but his mucous membranes were described as slate gray in color. And they gave him some IV fluid, and he had some acidosis, and they thought he had some sort of cardiology defect, like a cyanotic heart disease, like a cardiology consult. And eventually, when they drew some blood, they noticed it to be a hot chocolate brown in color, and that is sort of the sine qua non for methemoglobinemia. And they got a methemoglobin level on him, and it was 46%, and they sent a G6PD screen on him. It was normal. We'll talk about why that's important. And he ended up getting the antidote methylene blue, and his acidosis and diarrhea got better, and he was able to go home, routine pediatric care. And a few hours later, a second child came in. This is a 5-month-old, had a diagnosis of athetoid and spastic cerebral palsy with mental retardation. And he appeared sleepy, lethargic, and had, quote, bad, poor color. And he had constipation, which he was being treated with castoria, which I assume is castor oil, but was not getting any other exposures, no insecticides, no mothballs, no preserved meats, as we saw with the making of the salami and pastrami. That would have been the effect of the 11 blue men. But they noticed he had a funny color, so they did some blood tests on both him and his parents earlier, and no one knew what the results of those tests were. And so the family history wasn't obtainable. They hooked him over. He had some odd physical findings consistent with his mental retardation. And they put drew blood gas on him, put it on a filter paper, and they diagnosed methemoglobinemia. Sent a methemoglobin level on him, and it was also in the 40s, 43% in this case. And they also checked for several other enzymes, eventually G6PD and methemoglobin reductase. And he instead got treated with 500 milligrams of ascorbic acid, vitamin C, 3 times a day. This was felt that he probably had some sort of congenital form of methemoglobinemia. So these are the 2 different types of methemoglobinemia that can occur. And basically, methemoglobin is the iron in the 3+ state, or the ferric state, and I always prefer to use 3+ or the numerical number versus the normal physiologic state, which is ferrous or 2+. If you remember, it's 3+. In order to convert it back to normal, which is 2+, we need to add an electron. So you have 1 negative and 3 positives, you get back 2 positives, and therefore normal hemoglobin. And that's, in fact, how methylene blue, the antidote, works, is by being an electron donor. But our body is always subject to oxidant stress, and it makes small amounts of methemoglobin, which represents about 1% of the total erythrocyte hemoglobin on a daily basis. But we have a couple of enzymes like NADH, methemoglobin reductase, which is now known as cytochrome B5 reductase, and also small contributions, which is the main way it's excreted from our body or decomposed in our body, but there's also contributions from glutathione and ascorbic acid that have a minor role, and another enzyme that also works in a minor role as well. So there's two forms. There's an inherited congenital form where you can have NAD, methemoglobin reductase deficiency, or you can have a hemoglobin M, which is an abnormal hemoglobin. And these folks have polycythemia. Talk about that. Differential polycythemia. They're chronically cyanotic from birth.